All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Facilitators group. I said we were newly formed. We've been together for about a year, and we really are a collective group of thought leaders from across the university that really kind of want to be able to come together and embrace this shared value of diversity that we have here at the university. So we're excited that this group is here and we're able to provide opportunities like this. So we know that with everything going on in our world, this is really a pivotal time, not only in our country, but also at our university, right? And all of us really want to kind of see meaningful change, not only here in our university, but across our neighborhoods and our communities. And sometimes creating meaningful change really starts with having a conversation or embarking upon a dialogue. So that's why we're here. And I have to believe that you are here as well because you want to be a part of that change. So welcome and thank you. So in a few minutes, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves so you can get to know them before we go right into the questions. I want to make sure that everyone can hear us and see us, and there are no issues with you getting in. If you do have any issues, please put some information into the chat so we can help you. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm excited to be joined by a group of panelists from across the university. We have Molly Pereno, Nicole Nieto, Todd Sutton, and Temple Patton. And they're going to introduce themselves because I cannot give them due credit for all the things that they have done in their career. So I'll start with you, Temple.
Okay, Temple Patton from Ohio State Lima. I am the Diversity and Inclusion Manager. Been there, this is my third year, so I'm fairly new to the position. I am also the coordinator for the Business Management Program on the Lima campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Temple. What about you, Molly?
Hi, I'm Molly Pereno. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I serve as our Director of Education and Engagement in the Office of Institutional Equity, which was formed about a year ago. And I'm also serving as our interim Title IX coordinator. So I'm honored to serve you all in that capacity. And then I'll also just share that I'm a current PhD student in the College of Social Work.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
Nicole.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many familiar names in the participant list and some new names. I can't wait to have this dialogue with you all today through the Q&A that we'll be doing at the end. I'm currently the Assistant Vice Provost in the Outreach of Office, or in the Office of Outreach and Engagement, and I'm also an instructor in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I started off at the Multicultural Center in 2005 and have, yeah, there you go, Todd, and have had roles in student life, human resources, Office of Research, and now Office of Academic Affairs.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Welcome. Todd, last but not least.
Good morning, everyone. Todd Sutton, he, him, his are my pronouns. I serve as the Executive Director for the Student Life Multicultural Center and also as the liaison for DACA students on campus. Previously, I served also in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion as well. And I'm just happy to be here today with all my fellow colleagues. So definitely looking forward to this. So this is great.
Great, great. Welcome, Todd. Thank you. All right, so as we know that throughout the last few months, there's been a lot of conversations and needs to have conversations across our university. So one of the first questions I want to kind of dive into with the panelists is really how you begin to prepare to host a dialogue. What are some of the things you may do to prepare in hosting a dialogue? I'll start with you, Nicole.
Great, thank you. So for me, one of the models that I've used now for probably 13 years is the intergroup dialogue model. And this is out of the University of Michigan. The Multicultural Center was the one that started this work here on campus. I think it was 2007. This resource, this training, I cannot stress enough how much it's impacted my daily life. I mean, it's the professional life and the personal life. It takes you step by step in how to really create the space for effective dialogue. And that first starts with making sure that you are building relationships. It's really difficult to have an effective dialogue that can create change when you're not in relationship with one another. And so that's really key, making sure that there is a relationship with this group. Yes, you can have dialogue with a group of people coming in on for a training, but to really have the effective dialogue, it's really important that there's a relationship that is already formed. Then to prepare, I also think about, okay, how can I create that safe space? And I know we're going to be talking about that more.
Yes.
But also make sure it's a space where we are challenging one another too, in a way that is respectful. And dialogue at its core is respect. And at its core is not listening to get the other point across, but listening to understand. It's also good to have a partner in dialogue, particularly when you're just starting out hosting dialogues and facilitating them. A partner can be really important, and a partner that has different trigger points that you have.
That's good. That's really good. I like being able to have that partner and creating relationships. Those are really good. Temple, is there anything you want to add to that question?
I co-chair the diversity committee with Dr. Pat Carroll, associate professor of psychology. And we hosted the first open dialogue session June 9th for students, faculty, and staff centered around race relations in the U.S. And the first session was titled Clearing the Air, after the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and then the Black Lives Matter global movement. And then prior to our dialogue, we had discussed continuing the Day of Understanding in group conversations after Sarah and Molly conducted training on the Lima campus. But after the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown, we felt it was imperative to begin the conversation immediately. Two catastrophic events happening to the Black population simultaneously.
Great. Yeah. I did hear a lot about the sessions that you guys were hosting on the Lima campus and how effective they were. So thank you. Molly, what might you add to that question?
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments. I definitely agree with what Nicole was mentioning about the relationships. It's interesting because a lot of the facilitation and dialogue that I partake in is with folks that I don't know as well. I do my day-to-day job in the Office of Institutional Equity. So that's something I agree with and recognize is not always as possible, depending on the spaces you're coming into. So I think it's important to do your homework about the content area and who's going to be in that space so that you can understand what are the dynamics. Is this all students? Is this all employees? Is it a mix of, what life experiences are you bringing? You might not always know that, but it's good to figure out a little bit of background information. So some of that seems basic, but when you get caught up in the day-to-day, you go up to a room and be like, ooh, I don't even know who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
So that can be a challenge. So make sure that you know the basics of who's in the room. But other than that, so I don't just repeat other people's I think the most important thing, aside from what was already mentioned, is checking your own energy. And so how you show up as a facilitator is really going to dictate how that conversation goes. So I know I need to check my own mood before I get into a room. I love being in the physical spaces because a lot of folks on the participant list know I know them, and I walk everywhere. So I walk everywhere because that's how I set my mind right and kind of have a clear space. So I'm learning how to do that in the virtual space. Like I set aside a 10-minute timeout before this. So I could just think about how I wanted to show up in this space and remind myself like, oh, I want to set my pronouns on my name list. I also want to have some notes in front of me, which I have right here. So even little things like that, so that you feel organized and calm, because your energy could potentially impact how other people show up. And then the other thing I would just add to this point, because I know we're going to talk about some of these other points, is really the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a true dialogue? Is it a mix of I need to share some information with you and we're going to talk? So a lot of the spaces I show up in, I actually have to share a little bit about like expectations with harassment and discrimination. And we're going to talk about these subjects just so you set a clear expectation with folks about what portions are actually dialogue, so that they're not disappointed or know what to expect.
Absolutely. I do like being able to check your energy, because when you're in a room with people, you can kind of feel their energy, and sometimes you have to adjust yours based on what you're seeing and what you're experiencing from the audience. But Todd, would you agree that having virtual dialogue is definitely a little more challenging? So can you speak to that in any way about how you really need to make sure and not take for granted that virtual is easy as being in front of people?
No, thank you for thank you for asking that, Nina, because I was going to bring that up in my comments about preparation. Is that now that we're living in this era of Zoom and online technology to communicate, this really changes a lot.
Mm.
And so, in preparing for a dialogue, whether or not you are also responsible for the hosting or technology, you should also know the technology. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, there's just some simple things, or some things that I think we can overlook that we need to kind of keep in mind. Everyone is home now. And so because of that, these bandwidths are being stretched. Mm-hmm. And so I got a Ethernet connection to my laptop as a way of trying to kind of boost my Wi-Fi power, or whatever the technical term is, so that I don't glitch or freeze or anything like that while I'm online hosting a dialogue. Also, too, you have to look at the curriculum. Mm-hmm. The curriculum, if you're following curriculum, a lot of it was built on in-person dialogue. And so because of that, in regards to if you're looking at whether, presentation, or even if it is a dialogue, there's just some different things that if you're trying to kind of break the ice and kind of get people into the flow a little bit, that's going to be different. And so I've used the chat option as a way of getting people kind of warmed up a little bit, mm-hmm. And asking questions instead of just going straight into the dialogue, because I think that just like as if you would, start your car in the wintertime and you need to let it warm up, the same thing in regards to really kind of ease it into, some of these very tough topics. And the last thing I would say is that and Molly had already brought this up, but your energy online is so important. And so it's really of kind of finding that fine line between doing too much, but at the same time, you can't just look into the camera the whole time and just not do anything. And so that movement piece, the facial expressions, hand gestures, different things, all of those things are still important. And with that also, I think ahead of time and talking to whoever you're hosting a dialogue for, in regards to like, hey, what are the expectations for people turning their video on? It's much harder trying to host a dialogue if people have their videos turned off and you're just looking at somebody's name in white color font. And so I think that is important, that if we're going to host a dialogue, we need to see each other. We need to find ways of having these connections, which are much harder to do now, of course, online than of course, what we have always taken for granted and doing them in person.
Yeah, I do like that, the emphasis on really knowing the technology, because just when you think you are all set, one thing can go wrong and it changes the whole mood. So that's a great point. All right, so this next question kind of talks about maybe some resources that you all may use to kind of have some self-reflection before you start these dialogues. Like, what resources are you using to kind of get you grounded in this discussion before you have it? I'll start with Molly.
All right. So I was thinking a little more broadly, so I am eager to hear from the other panelists about some resources. So I typically ground myself in feminist theory. And so I like to rethink like how am I going to show up in this space? So I view it as like this shared learning moment, not that I'm an expert, but I'm there to really just drive forward the dialogue. And so I try to revisit some of those works as I think about how I want to prepare. And then I also do like I keep like holding my phone up. It's like, I have a lot going on here, but I like to just take notes to myself and get out my own thoughts, because that keeps me from like, here are my reflections on this topic, because I don't want the dialogue to be me trying to get my own points out. Like, I wrote them down. This is not about me. This is about you. Sometimes it is helpful to share your own thoughts and viewpoints, but sometimes it's not productive as a facilitator of dialogue. So that's kind of answers the question. I kind of didn't answer the question, but that's what I do.
Yeah, I like that shared learning moments. I like that language. Temple, what about you? What do you kind of use as a resource?
So the diversity committee comprised of students, faculty, and staff members as well. They're a great resource. We feed off of each other. They offer advice, and then also diverse ideas. And this was, we just had our first dialogue in June. We have another one scheduled for July 29th. But given the first one and how well it went, the feedback, the attendance and feedback we received was an indication that open dialogue centered around race relations was long overdue. And actually, I've emailed from colleagues that don't usually participate in diversity training. And the campus community needed that conversation at that time. So to prepare, we asked participants to submit questions ahead of the scheduled session to allow the committee members time to research answers to those questions so they could be answered thoroughly and thoughtfully.
Yeah, that's great. And being able to have that additional resource in your units, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, or some type of committee that you can bounce ideas from and kind of share best practices is great. Nicole, are there any resources that you may use?
Yeah, well, first off, you all probably know, those of you that know me, that I'm a huge proponent of intergroup dialogue. And that, like I said, has really informed so much of what I do. I highly recommend this. This is the difference between discussion, debate, and dialogue. You can Google this. It's through the Intergroup Relations program at University of Michigan. First, I think we need to understand what is the difference between a dialogue, a debate, and a discussion. So for example, in discussion, we present ideas. We're going down a list. We're presenting ideas. We've got an agenda. We're checking it off. In debate, which is oftentimes our typical mode of communication, believe it or not, we're seeking to persuade you to my side. We're hoping to win or succeed in this conversation. In dialogue, we seek to broaden our own perspectives. So we think, okay, well, wow, that's a really different perspective or thought than I have. Tell me more about that perspective that you have, that opinion that you have. What made you come to that opinion? So I really recommend it's exploring the differences between dialogue, discussion, and debate. You can Google it, Intergroup Relations, University of Michigan. reading that before you host a dialogue can really get you in the right mindset to make sure that you stay in dialogue. And each one on this list is just so, oh my gosh, you read it and you think, wow. The next piece that I'd like to share is you need to check your own identities, your own privileges, your own trigger points when you're going into a dialogue. And the first piece of the intergroup dialogue model is, who am I? What are my social identities, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation? We can go down the list. How do those identities impact how I show up in this space? Am I looking into a room where everybody looks like me and I feel kind of safe? Or am I looking into a room where, oh my gosh, you know, nobody looks like me? So being aware of who you are and what you're bringing to that space, I think is so key. That self-awareness that we all really, all of us, whether we're hosting a dialogue or not, we need to be more self-aware. And finally, I think having a mentor or dialogue mentor is really important. Somebody that you can reach out to and say, I'm getting ready to host this dialogue. These are my concerns. What are your thoughts? And it's also really good if that mentor, that dialogue mentor, has different identities than you do. So for instance, my dialogue mentor is a wonderful man named Charles Beeling, who came from the University of Michigan and is now living in Columbus because his wife is on faculty here. And he's an older, white, straight man. And he brings a different perspective, and he brings a lot of knowledge around dialogue too.
That's good. I really like being able to determine the difference between discussion, debate, and dialogue, because oftentimes we're in that discussion mode all of the time. And we think it's going to be effective if we're trying to host a dialogue. So I really like that. And the piece of like really kind of checking your own identities, that's really important, because in the midst of the dialogue, there could be triggers that trigger you, right? And you respond in a way that may derail the point of the dialogue.
And that's why the partner can be key. That's why the partner can be key. So they know if that's your kind of trigger spot, they can step in, you know, and you can go take that time that you need to regroup.
Absolutely. I may need to get a mentor. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So a couple of things that I had written down was, so, I mean, you have all these different models out here. So you have intergroup model, which is great. And there's a lot of scholarship behind it. And again, it's an institution into itself. And then you have other models. So intercultural maturity model, intercultural sensitivity. So there's a lot of models. I also study other things. And so I also study psychology because a lot of this is psychology in regards to how vulnerable people are going to be, how defensive people might be or become, especially with not even having that intention of coming into the session and being defensive, but things can come up. It's human nature. Something might hit you, and you go right into that fight or flight mode. That your mind doesn't know the difference between sometimes what it perceives as an attack. It's not some woolly. It's not a saber-toothed tiger in tall grass. It's just words, but to the mind, there's still that attack against the ego, and so. Part of it is that, part of it's, in talking of ego, Erickson, in regards to looking at psychosocial stages, and, and so I look at a lot of different things, and the other things I look at are television. And so with that, I mean, you have a lot of people who are anchors or people who have extensive experience in doing interviews or hosting town hall forums. And so I watch and I study them. And so I love watching Gayle King interviews. I love watching town hall forums where I get a chance to see, just the intention that people put into listening. And then from that, then how do they then take what is shared and then have other questions that they add to that, where they're expanding on what's being said, and then adding these rich layers of dialogue and conversation. And so I take a lot from television as well. And then the last thing is just mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And so just how do I make sure that I'm doing my best in being in the moment?
Yeah.
Which sometimes it can be hard, even if you're hosting a dialogue. There could be other things that are on your mind. And so for me, it's how do I use meditation? How do I use other things to really get myself ready to host or engage or be part of dialogue?
Yeah, I like that. And I do like the piece around watching TV, because there are a lot of examples of individuals hosting very effective dialogues, and the internet, YouTube, TED Talks. So I do like those references. So this next question kind of talks about collaborating, and we've already kind of spoke about, or you guys have already kind of spoke about having relationships, having a mentor. Are there other people that you may want to collaborate with as you prepare to have a dialogue? Temple talked about her diversity and inclusion committee. What other individuals or groups may you collaborate with?
I did, with the diversity committee, comprised of the co-chair, students, faculty, and staff. And we gather diverse, perspectives for planning, and, asking members to choose which questions they feel most comfortable answering. And then we follow up with feedback and then tips for, the next discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What about you, Nicole? Are there other things besides your mentor? Maybe there's other units, colleagues that you bring into preparing for the dialogue?
I think I always look back to the groups of people, the individuals, the areas that I've worked in before. I've kind of established relationships in those areas. So certainly those are groups that I reach out to, colleagues that, past colleagues from different units on campus. It's good to just have that sounding board when it comes to getting ready for a dialogue. Oftentimes, when you're hosting that dialogue in your unit and you're a member of that unit, that department, that college, you might want to consider collaborating with somebody outside of that department, college, or unit. We know that when we have these types of dialogues, if the person that's facilitating is a member of that community, people can maybe have some different types of feelings about that. They might be scared to be vulnerable. They might be scared to say certain things. Maybe they have certain feelings about that person that that inhibits them from participating in a full way. So I would encourage those units that are considering to have a dialogue to collaborate with outside units. And I know that a lot of people are wanting these right now, and there's only so many units on campus that you can collaborate with. So sometimes we have to think differently. I'm certainly open to any conversations people want to have before they host a dialogue. If it makes sense in my role, I'm happy to participate in facilitating that dialogue. So it's kind of a conversation. Reach out to people and just see what's available. They might not be able to help you, but hopefully they've got connections that can.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the fact of reaching out to units outside of your own. And that's probably one of the real values of this diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitators group, because we all come from different units, and we're able to collaborate with each other and bring different perspectives. So feel free to reach out to us, you guys, if you are looking for some thought leaders or even some mentors to kind of help you plan these dialogues. But Molly, being in the institutional equity office, who may you collaborate, or who might you collaborate with?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I hope there is opportunity to collaborate quite literally with every person or unit at our organization. I think to Nicole's points, folks who are in different places or situated differently think in different ways. So I don't know if any of our folks from are on, but I have just absolutely loved working with Extension recently. They've helped me think differently, and we actually, this was in the fall, did a tour of the state, and we went to their communities and met with them. So I think I've told Jackie and other folks in Extension this a lot, but I do think actually getting out there or in the virtual space, just connecting with people that you normally otherwise wouldn't, can be so key. So, hoping to connect with folks in that way. But if I could also offer to the points that were already made, not just people at Ohio State that are in different units, but also other institutions. So sometimes we could expand our minds by going outside of Ohio State. And even if it's not to actually co-facilitate the dialogue, but just to have like a pre-discussion. I know that I often lean on, we have like a Big Ten Title IX coordinators group, or just like friends that I've known from grad school. I'll give them a call like, hey, what do you think about this? Or, I'm going into this conversation, how should I approach it? I don't know if anyone from sorority and fraternity life is on, but I have to give that area credit because I am involved in an alumni capacity in that way. And I have a lot of group chats with people all over the country. We'll just kind of side chat. And even the way that someone at another institution or someone who's outside of higher education, because that is very valuable to get outside of the higher education realm, just to expand thinking. So even if it's not for the facilitation, to just expand your mindset and help to think differently about the topic that you're going to be dialoguing about, I would recommend just having some pre-conversation with folks as like a primer.
I agree with that. And wherever you can find those networks that you think are valuable, because, as a facilitator, I never want to go in and assume I know everything about the audience or the topic or whatever. I always want to kind of get thought leaders and people's perspectives and ideas. So, I really like that point. So Todd, this next question kind of speaks to, we're doing all these things to prepare, we're collaborating, we're grounding ourselves, but how do you really work on creating that safe or brave environment to host these dialogues, right? Because we want people to enter into these dialogues and feel really, really safe and feel like this space is one that can be conducive for them. So how do we begin to create this safe space?
Sure. And I'll just say, if you do hear a cute little voice in the background, that is my daughter upstairs reading. So she came back, so she's not upstairs, but so if you do hear that, again, it's not the voice in her head. It's just my daughter upstairs. That's a $64,000 question right there, Nina. And Nicole touched on it at the beginning of our conversation. So much of that, whether you want to create a safe space or a brave space or a space where people feel comfortable in sharing their thoughts and being vulnerable, so much of that is rooted in the pre-work that takes place. And so again, if you are coming in to host a dialogue with a group who has had very limited interaction with each other, you're going to have to be very realistic about how productive that conversation is going to be. And so, fortunately, I think most dialogues do take place within groups and teams that are already together. And so definitely the more that you can meet in advance with people who are helping to coordinate the dialogue, to talk about what are the group dynamics, what's the context, can you share more about the relationships within this group? How do people communicate? What have past dialogues have been like? The more that can help kind of inform how you can enter in that space and provide some ground rules, but also too in asking for people to also provide ground rules. So that's one. The second one, it just skipped my mind. I didn't write it down. And so if you can come back to me, Nina, and
I will.
But I think the first one so much of that first one is rooted, okay, I remember now. So much of that first one is rooted in relationships. The second one is interest convergence.
Mm.
And so if the dialogue is rooted in something else, whether it's rooted in a strategic plan or the launch of a new initiative, or by having this conversation, this is going to help our group do X. Being able to bring that up in different ways before the conversation, during the conversation, and reminding people, this is why I need your voice.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I need you to share. And then I also think being able to communicate that everyone shares in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have some people who are just quick processors, and so their mind is going like that, and they're able to really contribute a lot to the conversation. But for other people, it's going to take more time.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how do you structure small groups
Mm-hmm.
or things that you can add into the chat as ways that people can contribute who might be maybe a little bit intimidated by contributing in a larger group, especially if it's a larger group where you have a couple of people who have been known to dominate the conversation, whether
Mm-hmm.
intentionally or unintentionally,
Yes.
based on perception.
Yeah. And that's important too, because you will have, and even in large groups, you'll have people that will always be silent, right? They want to say something, but they're just not comfortable kind of speaking up. And we see this in the classroom where there's more dialogue or more conversation when you have those small groups. But Nicole, so go ahead. I'm sorry, Todd.
One more thing too, I'm sorry. The last thing is that, and this is the importance of the icebreakers and the easing into the conversation part. The more that you can ask questions that can you can get pieces of information about people, you can then use that as a way of bringing people into the conversation by using some of the things that they're interested in, have a background in, as a way of bringing them into the conversation as well. I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's really key. And so I'm going to pivot a little bit and direct this question to Nicole, because right now we are creating these conversations around race, right? And anti-racism. And oftentimes, and I'm sure many of the folks that are on this call are really trying to figure out, how do I go about it, right? So race is never an easy topic to talk about. So when we talk about creating this safe space or brave space for people to have a dialogue, what are some of the things that, if we're talking about race, people should consider and really kind of bring into the environment?
Yeah. I mean, this is so important. And one of the things that I want to say first is my dialogue mentor told me dialogue can be transformative when it's done right. When it's not done right, it can cause major problems. So when you do think about going into dialogue around topics of race or other social identities, you can't just kind of do it in a lighthearted, easy way. You really need to be prepared. And that involves doing your own self-reflection, like we talked about earlier. It involves bringing in collaborators to really think intentionally about how to have a dialogue on race. It also, as Molly said earlier, who's in the room, being prepared and ready to see, okay, who is in the room? Is this a room full of white people and there's a couple of people of color? You know, how are they going to feel in this dialogue? So those things are all really key. When you are in dialogue mode, you really can stay in a very effective and safe and brave space. When you get outside of dialogue mode, that's when these problems start to happen. You know, we often call these difficult conversations. I don't want to call them difficult conversations. I want to call them important. My dog's barking, sorry. Important, necessary conversations.
Yes.
Conversations that our life depends on it, conversations, right? These aren't difficult. Yeah, they can be. But gosh, we got to get rid of that word difficult.
Yeah.
They're important. They're powerful. They're transformative when they're done right. With dialogue, when you're talking about race, it's also the who am I, who are you, who are we together model. So you've checked your own identities. You've realized areas where you have privilege, areas where you might be targeted. Let's also get rid of privilege being a scary word.
Mm-hmm.
White people have become very scared to talk about their privilege. In dialogue mode, we need to be able to do that. I've been, saying the last couple of years, we've really been going there in a lot of conversations, except in race.
Yeah.
And we had the Me Too movement. We were starting to, talk about those issues, but we're still not talking about race.
Mm-hmm.
So many people are scared to talk about race. We're scared we're going to say the wrong thing. We're scared we're going to say too much. We're scared we're going to start crying.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay to have feelings. In dialogue, you have feelings.
Yeah.
In discussion, you don't. It's very check, right? So then it's also, who are you? What are your identities? What are your perspectives? What are your experiences? How are they different than mine? And how can I really listen to you? Knowing that I'll never fully understand your experiences and your perspectives based on your race or other social identities, but I can begin to understand, and I can begin to be brave enough to ask questions coming from a place of curiosity, of kindness, of love, not questions coming from a "I got you" type of question. So.
Yeah, I like that. Temple, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So we have a very small campus, and we're pretty close knit on our campus. But to create a safe environment and safe space for everybody to open up about this conversation, we had people register and ask their questions. And then the moderator presents the questions to our colleagues, from our colleagues anonymously. So they were not afraid to ask questions. This allows people to ask questions they have always wanted to ask a person of color, but for whatever reason, they have not had the space to do so. And we think that really helped to open up the conversation. The theme for this academic year is kindness and respect. So in the communication that we send out, we make sure that they understand that we're having this discussion with kindness and respect. And it's repeated in our introduction to the dialogue. We're going to have this discussion centered around race relations in the US, but with kindness and respect.
Yeah. And, I always tell people that we're going to have to live in this uncomfortable space for a while, right? Until it becomes something that we are comfortable talking about when we talk about race. So it's okay to be uncomfortable. I mean, folks that are African Americans or Black Americans, we are uncomfortable. So it's okay to be in these spaces where we are feeling uncomfortable. All right, so we are getting close to running out of time, but I do want to ask, especially now where people are coming to individuals like yourself or reaching out to diversity inclusion groups and wanting to have these conversations, what do you do when you have to bring up having these conversations without it being something that you're forcing on a unit or leaders? What do you do when you need to bring it up, but you don't know how to bring up having a dialogue? Molly, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, Nina, do you mind? Can I backtrack on the last question? Because I think,
absolutely.
Okay. And then I recognize the time as well. But real quick, I just want to maybe provide a slightly different either viewpoint or word choice. So I do not use the word safe space because I don't believe that I can fully promise safety for other people. And because of different lived experience, identity, I can never know what's going to trigger them or cause harm. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's a word that I personally don't use, but I understand that it is a word that is pretty universally known.
Yes.
And so with that, a few things that I think are important, and others might think differently. So I think different people touched on those points, but I think it's important to just reflect on your identity, but sometimes important to own it. So I led a panel on white privilege for Delta Gamma. It was a national webinar. And for me, it was really important to start by saying, we are talking about privilege. I am showing up as a white woman. Never know what it feels like or how people show up in the world if they are Black or persons of color. And so for me, that was important. That's not everyone's style. But if you don't want to be so overt about owning different parts of your identity, there are some more subtle ways to say, like, hey, I'm showing up as my full self. I invite you to do the same. So it's comfortable for you to share your pronouns or to even just write your name. That's an indicator that says, like, here and refer to me. And then I invite you to share that if you feel comfortable. So I just want to acknowledge that safe might be the right word for everyone, but maybe in those group norms that Todd talked about, if you can acknowledge if you are experiencing harm or something that someone said has caused you harm, how can you acknowledge that? So like men's are always helpful. So sorry to go back to that, but I just feel very passionately about that point. So the question you actually asked me, I feel like I did the politician thing where I'm like, I want to tell you, so I'm going to pivot. So how do you engage with folks? So this does happen where people reach out to us and say, hey, I want my unit to talk about this, but no one's initiating it. And so sometimes it's just sending that invitation. Some people on here might be like, oh, I got an invitation from you. And that might be true. So sometimes people want to do it, but they don't know how. And so I think sometimes extending that helping hand can actually mean a lot to people. They can always decline it. But if you have people who are in need but don't feel like they can actually take it on, because sometimes it feels like the people who are marginalized are put in the position to have to open that dialogue. And I think that's unfair. The onus should not be on the people who are experiencing harm. The onus is on the people who are privileged in that space. And so making sure you open that door. So because I answered a different question, I'll stop and pass it back. But
no, I do agree with the fact that oftentimes, the groups that are marginalized are kind of targeted in a way to kind of have these questions or have these dialogues when it should be, other folks as well that can host them. So Todd, anything you want to add to when you are kind of like put in a position to bring these up because we need to and kind of forced to have them? What are some things that you do?
Yeah. So some of the things I do and some of the conversations that I've had with some of my colleagues is that these conversations are going to happen. And this is a great opportunity as a leader to role model how this impacts you, the importance of having this conversation with the group, because we none of us control events that are happening. And so things are going to continue to happen. And I think with each missed opportunity, that erodes trust, that then brings on just a lot of perceptions, whether those perceptions are correct or not, in regards to, hey, does this person or does this organization or does this group care about whatever it is that's going on? And what Molly said, I get, like, some people might not feel like they're equipped, or it's like, I don't know if I'm equipped to do that. And my answer to that is, it's no time like now. And so, and again, that's the, kind of the drum that we all beat in regards to the importance of doing the grounding, reading, studying, staying up on current events, talking to people, because moments like these are going to come around and you're going to have to be ready. Because if not, then again, if you try to do it in a way that is not sincere or is very telling of how unprepared you are, like Nicole said, you can do more harm than good.
Absolutely.
And you're also doing harm when you do not address it and you do not talk about it. I heard horror stories of, and maybe horror stories is not the correct term, in regards to faculty who did not talk with students after what happened in November a couple of years ago. You know, when we had an incident where, you know, a young man who was going through some issues ended up harming people on campus and then ultimately lost his life. And you know, I think that, you know, returning back to business or everything going back to normal, I just think that that's not what employees need. And so those would be some of the things that I would kind of share in regards to, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a home run, something that's knocked out the park, but it has to be sincere. There has to be some thought into it. There has to be something in regards to, we know what we're doing. We have a sense of what we're doing. Maybe it's not perfect, but we are going to do something to show that this is something that we know is affecting people.
Yeah, and I agree that the timeliness of it, right? So if there's individuals here on this call that are saying, I need to do a conversation or a dialogue, but I haven't, it's okay that you are really kind of learning how to prepare, but the timeliness and really kind of getting to a point where this becomes a regular kind of thing we do. So Nicole, would you agree that, you know, it shouldn't have to be forced because we're reacting to something or an incident or a situation, you know, the timeliness and the fact that it's something we ought to do all the time.
Right. Yeah, you know, I so agree with the points made earlier. And, you know, that piece around sincerity is so key. And also the piece about not waiting for the person that's being targeted or the group, the community, the group, the identity that is being marginalized to have to bring this up and say, hey, this is going on. I'm feeling some kind of way about this. Also, we don't want leaders to engage in dialogue just because they think they need to check it off the list and they think it makes their, you know, them look good, right? And again, it goes back to that piece around sincerity. And so to be sincere in putting forth a dialogue initiative in your unit, department, or college is really key. And it goes back to you being self-aware as a leader or as a person within the college or department or unit, the office. Okay, I need to be self-aware. I need to, as we've talked about, do my homework. Go on Amazon. There are so many books that have risen to the top of the bestsellers list on race right now, you know. Check those books out. Listen to the different videos, that follow some people on Instagram that you might not typically follow. Engage in conversations with people that have those different perspectives. Engage in conversations with the people of younger generations who might have a better grasp on some of these dialogues around race and different identities more so than you might have. Talk to your children, right? Many times they're the ones that have these great ideas and perspectives. So really that piece is, you need to check yourself, right? And your sincerity in truly having a dialogue to create change, to hear other perspectives, to honor people's feelings, to hear what people are saying and not just to check off the box.
Yeah. That's great. I really like that. And to be able to, you know, not just check yourself once, right? And to kind of have some self-reflection, but all the time, like make it a practice of just checking my own triggers and awareness is important. So Temple, I know at your campus, you guys have done a few dialogue sessions, was it a reaction to what is going on with George Floyd, those incidents, or was it something that you guys have had in practice on your campus to do?
It was both. So after we had the Day of Understanding training from Molly and Sarah, we discussed afterwards having these group conversations centered around race on an ongoing basis.
Mm-hmm.
But then after COVID, and we weren't able to congregate on campus, then the events that happened with COVID and then the murders and then the protest, I felt that the time was now. And I did not want to wait until we get back to campus in the fall, if we are back on campus in the fall. Things are changing so fast that I wanted to take advantage. I wanted the diversity committee to take advantage of that time to have the conversations on our campus with colleagues that we knew needed to have the conversation as well. And then, for me, being a Black woman that has 2 Black sons, we'd had conversations, and I knew through our conversations, and then also with my white friends and colleagues, they were asking lots of questions. And I felt that, if they were asking questions, we needed to have this discussion because they felt that they needed to, also bring up race, and had them ask me, have I ever said anything to hurt you? And calls and emails and texts. And I said, well, if you had and you hadn't listened to me, we would not still be friends. So to, clear the air and let them know. But also I tell them that we're all deprived to a certain degree because our true history is hidden from us. Our K through 12 public school systems. And so that means if you didn't get this knowledge about racism for your family or attend college, as friends have not, it keeps those that are privileged in the dark about what is happening to people of color in this country. I don't feel like it's forced. If anyone wants to talk about race, I think we need to keep having these conversations. We can't let it stop after this year. We need to, and I think this has set the trajectory to conversations now with our colleagues and in groups too. We're going to continue. We're going to break out in groups for fall and start having these conversations led by members in the diversity committee.
Yeah, that's good. And someone mentioned, going back to normal. There's no normal that we can go back to. I think everything we do going forward in this diversity and inclusion space and just, how we engage and make our units inclusive will be different, right? We got a lot more stuff that we got to put into it or add to it now because of all of these things, not just George Floyd, but the pandemic and so many other things. So, so one last question for our panelists before we get to the audience with some questions. Is there like one last piece of advice that you would give individuals on this call to really kind of effectively host, in addition to what you've already said, effectively host these dialogues? Todd, I'll start with you.
So I heard that the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius used to have a person who would walk behind him, and that person's sole job that whole entire time was to keep whispering to him something to the effect of, you're just a man. You're nobody special. This isn't about you. And so he had this person as someone to kind of keep his ego in check. Just a constant reminder that there's nothing about you that is just that much special than anyone else. And so I think that sometimes when in hosting dialogues, I think sometimes the ego can kind of ease its way in there where, if you read a couple of books, attended a couple of trainings, all of a sudden now you feel like an expert and you feel like this is your show. Like, I am going to come in here and I am going to dazzle, I am going to impress, and everyone is going to leave enlightened because of me. And so with dialogue, it's not about you. It is about whatever the purpose of that dialogue is. And you're just an instrument in helping to move that dialogue forward in accomplishing that purpose. And so it, you know, also too, in removing that so-called expert thing, people who host dialogues or facilitators can also learn during a dialogue. And it should be looked at as that. Dialogue shouldn't be a hierarchical thing. And that also comes from intergroup dialogue and looking at intergroup dialogue. And so I think that's one of the really key things, is that in entering dialogue, especially if you're the one that's leading it, it is about the outcome, the purpose of the dialogue, not about just you and what you're hoping you can contribute. Like, that's part of it. But I think that in doing so, I think it becomes very easy then, where you think you're doing dialogue, but like Nicole said, no, you're doing more debate. You're doing more of something else, because now it's more self-focused versus it being focused on the group.
Absolutely. So real quickly, Nicole, what would you add to that?
I would just say, let's rewrite the narrative of how we communicate with one another. Let's not be scared of feelings. Let's not be scared of emotional responses that we might have to dialogues that we're in. And one of the things that I have seen by my mentor, Charles, when we co-host a dialogue together, and we see this a lot at the university, people start talking about what they've read. They start talking about, well, this and this and this, but they don't say, I feel this way. I experienced this. And so Charles would always redirect them. Okay, but how do you feel about it? Not what do you know about it? What do you feel about it?
Like that. Yeah. Temple, the last bit of advice.
Yes. So, you know, hosting these dialogues is new for me. To add to Todd's, yes, we're not all experts, but we can all have these conversations. And what I do know in this work cannot be contained to those of us that experience systemic racism regularly in this country. And that if you are representing the university or the Office of Diversity and Inclusion in any way, we owe it to marginalized populations in the struggle to be that voice for them. We owe it to them. And Ohio State's motto, Education for Citizenship, calls upon us to be leaders to change the world. And the only way to do this outside of the classroom is through open dialogue around race. We need to talk about it. We need to continue to talk about it.
That's really good, Temple. Thank you. And Molly, what about you? What last bit of advice?
Yes, I would echo all of those sentiments. And I would also acknowledge to Temple's point that we all have a role to play in creating a more just community, both at Ohio State and our greater communities. And I hope people will leave this session thinking about what their contributions will be, and also acknowledging that if your strength perhaps isn't facilitation, that's okay. You can still get the dialogue started by simply reaching out to a facilitator or just suggesting to someone else. So I don't want folks to feel like they have to be everything to everyone. They just have to contribute what their strengths allow for. So that's my main hope for folks.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. So we have a lot of questions in our Q&A box. So I'm going to turn it over to Leo and Lori to give us a question from the audience to the panelists.
Great, thank you. We'll go ahead and start with the first one. I think it's a really important one. When is it better to bring in an outside facilitator versus having an internal facilitator? Thinking about experience and expertise versus having existing relationships. We'll just
Anyone
have one person answer each question. We only have a few minutes left. So who would like to take a stab at that one?
I'm only answering the easy questions. That is a difficult one to answer. I think that I think for group conversations, and so if you are the director of a unit, and it's something where it's important for everyone to be in the dialogue. I think that is one example of when it's important to bring somebody from the outside. Also, too, if it's something where you might not have the content knowledge or the grounding, or no one on your team has the content knowledge or the grounding, those could be other opportunities. And then also, too, you have some people who are just highly, highly skilled. So like Nicole Nieto said, Charles Beeling is one of those highly skilled people who could really come in and provide a level of facilitation that is higher than probably I don't want to say average person could do, but he has an exceptional skill set from years of experience and knowledge, as an example. So those would be a couple of things I would put out there. But again, I think you have to weigh it in regards to how much of this is something kind of in group conversation, communication, versus bringing somebody from the outside. So that there can almost be like a half a session in itself.
Yeah.
So I'll stop.
Yeah. All right. So Leo, maybe, and Lori, one more question, and then we'll kind of close this out.
Okay. In that case, this is Lori. We had a question about how to identify dialogue mentors on campus.
I guess I'll go and take that real quick. So I'm a big proponent of developing your own networks, seeking people out where you can really create a connection with them. I'm less of a proponent of matching people, that don't know each other. So I would say, reach out to one of us. I'm volunteering, everyone. Happily, reach out to me. Say, let's have a Zoom coffee. We could have a conversation. Just start to get to know people and see who you have a good connection and fit with. Any of the DEI facilitators group members, reach out to some of them. Have that informal conversation via Zoom over coffee or tea, and see who you connect with. And I don't call Charles my mentor to his face. Like he probably knows, but we haven't formalized that,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes I call him my friend-tor because he is a friend who happens to be a wonderful mentor. Yeah. So develop your own networks, start making connections with people, and that'll happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for one more question, Leo and Lori.
Yes, we have a great one about moving from dialogue to action and change. So that dialogue is less performative and more effective.
I think that I want to say most dialogue. Well, I believe that most dialogue should lead to some kind of action. In some ways, even if it's just being able to provide additional material for people to learn. But I do think that dialogue is a great way of kickstarting something going into action. I think the key part is reinforcement, and so I think that's the part that we hadn't had a chance to really talk too much about within the span of today's conversation. But I think that's one of the hidden or one of the parts of successful dialogue. I think is not always tapped into is, what does the reinforcement look like? Because if that reinforcement part isn't there, although it can be transformative, that it can wear off if there's an expectation that something else is going to follow. And so I think it really all depends on what are the intentions and purposes of the dialogue. Sometimes the dialogue is just dialogue. It's to get people together to talk and exchange ideas and share. And at the same time, it also can be a way of introducing different initiatives or plans. But I think it's really about the intention.
And Todd, can I add to that really quick?
Absolutely.
I totally agree with everything you've said. I have had some where we want to have dialogue and action items. And what I've noticed is people want to jump to the end, and we would have better action items if we had better dialogue first. So some people need boundaries. And so if we set up, I think Nicole and I both kind of mentioned some of this earlier, but like, what's the purpose? And so say like, hey, for this hour, we're dialoguing. Some of you might want to talk about action items, and that's part 2, or we're going to split this time in half. So I think clear boundaries, because if we don't fully understand the perspectives of ourselves and other people, I think we limit the action items with. So I totally agree with you, and just wanted to offer that little tip for folks who are maybe setting up some of their first facilitations.
Yeah, that's really important. I agree. Most people want to jump to the action. I know, and being in HR, we are action-oriented people. We need to solve. But the dialogue is really where you kind of figure out what to solve, right? So I want to thank all of you for joining us and sharing so many great perspectives. I learned a lot in terms of just really kind of checking my ego, being able to center myself and be self-aware. I like the whole mentor collaboration, right? And really kind of having these relationships. So you guys have provided so much good information to kind of help individuals host their own effective dialogue. And for now, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Childers to kind of close us out and talk about our part 2 session that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Sarah?
Hi, everybody. So I'm not going to even try to summarize all the nuggets of knowledge that was shared with us. I would have to repeat everything that was said today. So I want to let the audience or attendees know that we will be providing, as a follow-up to this session, a resource document and template that will kind of pull all this information together to help you prepare for your own dialogue. There were a lot of models and key concepts identified in this session, so we will also include those in the model and include some links and resources to that as well. Also on July 29th, we will have a second panel. The topic of that panel will be a follow-up to this one. So in this one, you learned how to prepare for a dialogue. In the second one, we'll start to talk about, okay, you're here, you're gonna host a dialogue. What does it mean to host that dialogue? And what are actions that you can take after a dialogue? So we are very thankful to our panelists. I also want to give a shout out to Lori and Leo, who have been moderating the Q&A, and actually to all the members of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Facilitators group. We work together to put this webinar on, so everyone's appreciated here. And thank you for all the panelists that were engaged. Their questions were excellent. Those questions we will try to address them in both the handout and in our next panel. Again, that will be on July 29th. So I think with that, I want to suggest, Nina, a few folks have asked if we could extend the Q&A, and if panelists have time, would you like to do that, or would you like to conclude for now?
So I'll ask the panelists, do you guys have a few more minutes to hang out and answer some questions from the Q&A?
Sure.
Okay, so I do understand if those folks that need to get off, because we are at our time, but if you want to stay on and we'll take some more questions from the audience for the panelists, that'd be great.
You want to just say for 10 or 15 minutes, not much longer. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so Leo and Lori.
Okay, I think Leo has to go, so I'll be giving you a few more questions. We had a few questions around Facilitating dialogue when there are people who are antagonistic to dialogue, or if people are participating in the dialogue whose perspectives may be very uncomfortable or difficult to hear, but they actually need to be in the dialogue. And also falling into this category are, navigating the response of inappropriate responses, such as racist responses. So the big category is people saying things that are potentially harmful or inflammatory, but also people offering perspectives that might not be popular, but these are people who do need to be at the table. Can someone speak to that?
I'd like to share one thing really quick, and this is an actual exercise that I use. And this is after I work to set up the ground rules with the group. And regarding the ground rules, it is important for you maybe to list a couple to get the conversation started, and then to, check the pulse of the group and what ground rules do they want. So let them create that, co-create that together. Then there's another exercise that I do with what are you looking forward to in this dialogue, and what are you most scared about in this dialogue? And they write that on an index card. So on one side they put it's actually their hopes for the dialogue. And then on the other side they put their fears for the dialogue. And then we mix them up, pass them around, and people read other people's cards. And, when you hear that, some of the things that come out in those fears are the fear that I have a really unpopular opinion. I know that people are not going to, that they're going to really challenge me on what I say. And in fact, I did that one time for a class I was teaching on cultural pluralism. And a student came up to me afterwards and he said, I'm probably not going to talk in this class because I really disagree with this. But we set up a dialogue. And I went through the difference between dialogue and debate. We went through that exercise. We set up those ground rules. He wouldn't stop talking, but he was talking in a way that he was responsibly expressing his opinion. Yes, it was different. The students were engaging in a dialogue. Well, why do you think that? Or why do you have that perspective? So that would be one way to handle it that I would suggest. Now, of course, there's people that are always like this. They're always got their arms crossed. And for me, what I do is I be kind to them. I find that if I am, forceful and maybe, and act in a negative way towards them, don't validate or don't, hear what they're saying. They really want to shut out. When I ask the question, well, why is it that you think that? Not why do you think that, but why is it that you think that? Or what made you have that opinion? A lot of times we're taught these opinions by our parents, by where we grew up, and when you start to unpack that, it's a way to encourage people to realize that they may not be responsible for having that opinion put in their head, but then they are responsible for, okay, how can I broaden my perspective?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yes, Todd.
I think when you're facilitating dialogue, you're in this space where you're not there to advance your own agenda or beliefs, and you're not neutral. You're not a robot.
Yeah.
And so you have this fine line that you're walking, that you're on. And so because of that, there's certain things that I think they're just not up for debate or dialogue.